I do have to mention though, Brad, that the spread of goodies that's out there was unbelievable.
Nice.
I want to thank everybody for what you brought. There were some unique things there I've never tried before. This is great. I think we should have a contest every meeting.
Agreed.
What can we give away? One of our guest speakers, a queen or something like that, maybe?
I'd donate a queen for a good meal.
And same with the prizes. Very nice. Thank you for anybody who donated stuff there. John, did you bring something today?
I bought a book.
You bought? Okay, all right.
And his electric personality.
You know what? It's great when a club can participate and bring stuff. And you know what? I haven't seen these two gentlemen for a long time, and they walk away with a prize today. I heard one of your names called, didn't you? Or no? Yes, you did. No? Okay, I'm wrong. So if you don't show up, you don't get prizes.
That's right.
Our guest is very familiar to us. He is a third-generation beekeeper. He began bee husbandry in Germany at an early age of 7. How did you know that? You read this script. Where he began his analytical and critical study of bee behavior, which to this day has formed his many convictions. Upon arriving in Canada, he began with 3 hives and has since built a successful commercial apiary, and he has been raising queens for 40 years. He's only 45, and selecting queens since 1996. Today, he sells honey, wax, and supplying local beekeepers with hive hardware with queens and bees. The apiary operations are shared with his wife, Anna. At extraction time, Anna becomes the honey house manager, and our guest makes himself very scarce, like a drone, probably fishing, and they have two adult daughters. Our guest has a reputation of having the cleanest and most organized and nicest looking colonies around. It is evident that he has ample experience and knowledge in queen rearing and genetic breeding. I need to share a very quick story of an experience that I had very early in my beekeeping, probably about 12 years ago. I was having difficulties, and I invited this guest to come and help me assess the hives and look at it. And of course, we went through the hives, took out things, and he was very silent. He was in his uniform and all dressed up. And there was one particular hive that just had an attitude. It reminds me a little bit of Keith, a little bit, a little bit temperamental. And then the little tail went up like this, or the little back went up like this, and the wings flopping. And the speaker comes to me, he says, "Step aside. Watch this." Okay, so he does, and he comes over, and he does this Yoda kind of type of things, and taps on the lid and says, "Stop that!" And you know what? The little tails went down, and they all went down. Since that time, I've called him Yoda. So he's Yoda to me. However, his philosophy in beekeeping, he says, your job as a beekeeper is to rejuvenate and grow them in healthy, productive adult hives. Bees fix our mistakes, but you must know the bee behavior in order to know what to do next. So presenting Selecting Queen Breeding, please help us welcome Waldemar Damart.
You have a free hand?
You gotta take this one.
Let me pin this on you.
Okay.
This is for the room, and this is for the record. There you go. Good. Thank you, sir.
Is it on? Yeah. Well, good evening, everybody, whoever I did not greet yet. This has been a while since I've been up front here with you guys, and there's a lady, she's smiling. She's the one that convinced me to come up here. So my question was, what should I talk about? There's a lot of issues or subjects that can be addressed. And so the prevailing objective was queens, and then somebody else suggested about the selective queen breeding. Well, I've been doing this without actually putting so much thought and effort towards it, since this is actually the philosophy where I come from. You improve the stock on an ongoing basis. You replace the sick ones and you keep on going. So in order to get going with all of this stuff and in order to be able to select, you actually have to have a base for it. And see if we can actually work this. So a few years ago, some of you been at my place and we did a queen rearing workshop, and some people still kind of looked a little younger there. So the selection is actually, it can be difficult, but it actually is rewarding at the end. So the question is, when can you select? The selection actually needs to have numbers, and the numbers have to be relatively big. Any viable selection starts at 50 hives. That's the reality. And the hives have to be actually genetically different from each other in order to know which one actually is performing also different. In order for be able to pick if they're all equal, you have to introduce a lot of genetic material. Then you actually end up using a lot of artificial insemination. And when artificial insemination is introduced, they call it a filter. A single drone that inseminates a queen actually has enough sperm to inseminate her and to insert genetics. However, over the years, I followed some European breeders, some North American breeders, and just recently I had a good couple of conversations with Corey, and I have to say one thing: we're all on the same page. The reason being is we know how to select and we pursue it. So, like I said, you need a certain amount of hives in order to do that, and you have to have diversity within that population. So, and then you start with your priorities. Oops. VHS, and let's go one back. VHS, Varroa sensitive hygiene. That encompasses a lot of stuff, from genetic abilities to detect signals and smells from the brood and uncap and recap it, to mauling mites, to biting them. There's a lot of stuff in there. So some of you have probably seen Corey's videos. He actually picks a lot of brood apart and counts the numbers and sees how many reproductive and non-reproductive hives mites are in the comb. The way I go about it, my system is very similar to Randy Oliver's. I use the screen bottom board, and I also use the wash. So the way I do it, I test it every month in the summer, starting within May and ending up in September. The screen bottom boards are creating a lot of extra work because you have to keep them relatively clean in order to see the mites within the debris itself. If a hive is capable of grooming and throwing the mites off, you're going to have a much bigger amount of mites below the screen. At the same token, when you wash, you're going to have a way smaller number on the wash itself. So you have a linear correlation between the two issues. This is my basic selection. When you watch a video from Randy Oliver, he does just the wash and requeens all his hives with the most prolific bees that are capable of grooming off the mites. So it's relatively simple, the way it sounds, but extremely time consuming. Because if you do just 50, every month you have to have a wash and you have to count all of those mites. And on top of everything else, you actually have to keep records. Without records, it's becoming to be useless. by looking at this, I'm encouraged and a little bit upset. There is one reason why I'm upset. The Europeans are way ahead of us. There's already operations that are running completely without any miticides. There is a fellow by the name of Paul Jungels. He is from Luxembourg. He started selection in '95, and by 2015 he had already the entire operation running without miticides. And because he was so successful, they actually picked up his project and financed it. And now that genome actually is spread through southern Germany and France. I know some of the people that he actually works together with. But anyways, Randy Oliver is pretty close on the same way there too, because none of the fellows use actually artificial insemination, and I found it to be interesting. It's kind of counter statement from the original finds that VHS is not heritable. But this actually proves it is heritable, and it's very strongly heritable. Even talking with Corey at the convention there, he said too, because he doesn't test all the queens that he gives out, but some of his commercial friends that will get the queens for testing, and his test is going from 1 to 4. He says those virgin queens are free air mated, and when he actually runs the tests, they're actually scoring 4. That's the highest score that he can actually have. So even being mated with a unknown drone, it's still a very strong genetic. So that's what I mean by being genetically stable. If you reach that point where this whole thing becomes to be genetic stable, then you start picking from the best ones. You cannot do that before because it's just too much of a spread. My preference are darker bees, and it has been right from the beginning due of the capability of those bees to actually be more conservative in the winter time. So I'm not the biggest fan of the Italian breed like the Langustica, and that's why you will see more queens that are looking almost blackish or brown. Well, the next thing is a self-giving thing called resistance. The hives winter pretty good by now. I'm at 97% success rate. My biggest loss over the years was 22%. And it was not due to the bees wintering bad. It was due to me making a biggest mistake that I could have made. I produced 1 box of honey in September. And that's my winter bees that produced that honey. In the springtime, I paid for it with 22% losses. So if something goes wrong, or I did too many mistakes in my operation, I would end up maybe with 8% losses, but 3%, 5%, that's about where I arrive with that whole thing now. Also, the way I test, all of my queens are mated in those Epidea boxes, and by the time fall comes around, almost all of them are still full with queens. So I leave them standing into October, and there's very little insulation there actually. And then I actually see how many of those actually really make it by minus 20 and 25 degrees. And you know what? Most of them do. Even with those small boxes, with a very small cluster, they will make it till end of December. So that shows you that you actually, with having the, well, we sometimes complain about, but I say by having the privilege of a cold winter, you can actually select a very strong bee that way. She's already genetically capable of creating those tight clusters and producing a certain amount of energy with a very small consumption of food. Because as soon as the as soon as the cold temperature go up, that the consumption of food goes up too. It's their heating source. So a lot of people right now actually are very concerned how much food is left in the boxes. With a mild winter, we should not have that concern. It should be actually the opposite. Should be more left. So yesterday I was very nosy and I opened up 5 and I went frame by frame. So 2 of them had 8 frames of bees. They had 1 frame of brood, had approximately 5 frames of food still left. The ones that were a full box of bees, there were 2 frames of brood in there, and they had about the same amount of food left. The only thing that I saw actually was the bee bread within the place where the cluster was, and the place where the center where they actually had the brood, the bee bread was almost not available anymore. So they have been brooding very slowly through the winter and using all of that stuff up. Going further out towards the honey, those frames are still all filled with bee bread and with food too. So I don't see there to be an issue. So that's another step. And everybody that breeds will breed for something else. So there's two ways to raise queens, and majority in this world are actually done through grafting. It's kind of an art, and you have to get used to it. You have to practice a lot. What helped me personally jump the hoops were actually the Chinese grafting tools. They're very forgiving. If you thin them out and bend them a certain way and keep them moist, they're very flexible. And we're not all getting a little younger since we saw that picture in the beginning there. So basically you need to get yourself some good piece of equipment with exchangeable glasses on it and lights, so you can see that larva if you want to graft, and it becomes to be very easy. One trick, and this question would come up very often, well, when is the larva too old? Or when is she too young? How do I see that? So basically 3 days of an egg that stands, and on the 4th day it falls over. And once it falls over and cracks open, the bees give it a little bit of food. At that moment, what you will see, the color of that larva at that moment is still translucent. It's not white. It's kind of a diluted milk. It looks very hard to describe almost. It's still kind of a little bit of a see-through situation. So that's the earliest stage that you can actually take it and graft it over. And the closer you are to this stage, the higher the chances that you actually have a high quality queen at the end. Because all the studies point out towards the older the larva, the less of a quality queen you be having at the end. Well, Agenta system, I showed this here years ago and introduced it, and I think BMate was kind of a little swamped for a while there because everybody was buying a kit. It's relatively simple. It's a plug and play situation, and you have to find your queen. You have to basically put her in there, and then 24 hours later you release her, and 3 days later you can watch the transition from the egg into the larva, and then you basically take the plugs at the end out and replug it into a different system. So you're creating your cells. I know lots of you knew Ted, and Ted was very bad at the end with seeing the larva, so that's the system that you always used. And I kind of got used to this in Europe already, but I started transitioning away from it, because if I want to graft something from a specific colony, I can basically do it right away, because you always can go through the frames and you can find a corner with larva. If you know how they're supposed to look on the age, you can graft right away if your starter is ready to receive it. With this, it takes you 3 days of an egg, and it takes you an extra day for larva, so you are actually wasting, quote unquote, wasting 4 days. So it's a little faster. Back to mating. I did artificial insemination. I took a course in Europe. At that point in time, it was advanced enough, but what I found is actually the queens at that time did not make it past 4 to 5 months, the artificial inseminated ones. Now, talking just recently with Corey, he said his queens are living way past 2 years, so it's not an issue. Obviously, something has improved, and I'm not up and up on the stuff. So basically, all of my queens are free air mated, using the small mating boxes. What's the reason for using a small unit? It's about only 100 grams of bees that are on there. And if this thing is failing, it's 100 grams of bees and maybe a couple of spoons of honey. That's all you lost, because the percentages that you actually will have successful be mated and good queens is around 75 to 80%. So if you actually get your queens mated in nukes, this is a significant loss, specifically for a commercial operation. You just lost 25, 15, 20, 25 nukes that are not going into the production the same way as the rest of them do. So when I make up actually nukes, my queens are already mated. I only make nukes with mated queens. I can explain a little bit how I go about this. The first queen that goes into this Apidea mating box is hatched, and basically I shake young bees off brood frames, and you can vatten them. I smoke them with tobacco smoke. They're getting a little bit of a knockout, and then you actually can fill with a certain size of a spoon. You can fill them up from the bottom, and you can throw that queen in there right away. Acceptance is 100%. They never reject the queen that way. If she is actually well hatched and in a good shape, and then they sit actually for 2 days in a cold building or somewhere in a garage that is not warm, because if they are in that box and they start getting excited, they have to kind of cool down. So after 2 days in the evening, you set them outside, and 10 days later, you can actually go and check. They're usually already laying eggs. Then every following queen gets actually introduced via cell. It's done on the 14th day of hatch, but on the 17th day of this first queen, because when I pull queens, my queens have to have actually kept brood in order for a queen to be called ripe. That pheromone only develops in that stage when you actually see kept brood on the frames already. If you pull her too early, that pheromone is not there. So if you introduce her in the cage into a nuke, or nuke is just still acceptable, but you try to do it within the hive, they'll definitely notice it right away that she is not producing all the sufficient pheromones, and she's also not mature enough to actually be accepted by the unit itself. So average mating time is 10 days. The latest I would accept if the weather is good, 15. And after that, I have to dispatch. Or I have to really inspect and see what's wrong. There are some situations that you can actually see why there was no mating, or she has mated, or why she's not laying eggs. Some queens, when queens are actually made with the last drone, they will actually rip the phallus out and they take it home. If she's running around too long with that and it dries up, she cannot eject it anymore. And so basically she wants to lay eggs, but that thing is still inside. So very often, if you see that, you can remove it with a forceps or something, and a day later, all the frames are laid up. So it's a small fine detail that you can actually, if you look closely at it. So much for mating. I think I actually put the artificial insemination in here. Oh. Yeah, I mentioned the artificial insemination is more of a filter than anything else, because you're trying to either introduce genetics or you're trying to preserve genetics within the queen. If you are free air mated, then there is a high possibility that the genetics are more mixed. In nature, it's an interesting thing. It seems like some hives are capable of keeping the genetics without having any issues of free air mating. And I think it was Königer in Germany that discovered that some races are stratifying. What that means, actually, the colder air on top is more suitable for the darker bees, where the Langustica, the yellow bee, will actually mate lower. That's actually how they separate from each other. But I'm pretty sure with the hybrids that we are dealing here is actually probably something in between. And some of them will hop out just because there is good weather, especially in the springtime. The earliest queens, they will take any day that has enough temperature to go out. They will mate, but what kind of a drone is at that moment there? Anyways, hive introduction, like I said, I do not pull any queens that don't have capped brood, and I've never introduced a queen into any unit with bees in there, because I find the bees will be very protective, even if she's longer in there. If you find cages where the queen has been just released, usually the attendants in the cage have been killed off, and they will be still in there. If you go later in there, they usually remove the attendants too. If you have a sticky cage, and very often I've seen the flat cages that came in from Europe with Ukrainian queens or Italian queens, they were more sticky inside. The bees could not remove the dead attendants, so you can actually see that we're in there. Even though when you introduce the cage, the attendants are all alive. So there is actually a fight happening there. Eliminating that right from the hop. I do not wait any period of time to introduce the queen. Usually when I need to introduce a queen into a nuke, it goes in there right away after the nuke is made. And I kind of treat the nukes the same way as I treat the mating boxes. My nukes have all screen bottom boards, the boxes. I make them up, and within 15 minutes that queen in the cage goes in there, and that nuke goes actually in the garage for 2 days. And here's the interesting thing, 98% acceptance rate. Why is that the case? The case is that you don't have any foreign queens or foreign bees that actually mingle into those nukes. Because when you actually put all of those nukes out, they don't know where they belong and they start actually flying around. There's a lot of problems that those bees create within the hives itself. So if you actually have, after 2 days, that queen being released and not having any interference, yet the interesting thing is happening too. If you introduce a queen within 15 minutes, the hive or the nuke will know the queen is there. It actually hampers them long enough not to start cells. And once they pass a certain stage, they have no choice but accepting her. So that's kind of my approach. And honestly, if you use that system, even if you don't buy local queens and the queens come in from overseas, and I call them dry, I mean, it's actually they have been without brood and any pheromone production. With those 2 days being in a garage, actually helps a lot even on those queens to be accepted. The acceptance rate goes up quite a bit. So here's a thing that I actually really have sometimes a beef with the beekeepers that pick up stuff. Because queen is not a shelf product. You cannot actually have her stored in the cages for a very long time. Or you have to replace on an ongoing basis the nurse bees. And depending on the amount of queens that you have in the battery box, you need sometimes like 1 kilogram of bees in there if you have 50 queens, you know. And the thing is too, the longer she sits actually in a cage, the more she dries up, the longer it takes for her to start producing pheromones again, the lower the introduction. On top of everything else, if you store them, the bees usually choose one. They like a queen that actually is maybe producing a little bit more pheromones. So basically, strawberries are good to enjoy right in the beginning, and so are the queens. Well, the results are, I averagely yield a crop of 320 pounds per hive. My biggest hive so far produced 650 pounds from a single hive. I do 2 pulls. I counted out at the peak of egg laying. When you go into the books, you'll find that at 2,000 eggs in 24 hours, that's a good queen. I did the math on some of my queens, they're hitting the 3,000 range. And this is how you can actually build in short time big populations. The first picture is an overwintered hive. Basically, I could probably slice it in 3 and they will still produce a good crop. Also, what I like to have a full frame of brood, but I don't like if the corners don't have honey anymore left. That actually is a little bit excessive to me, because in the fall time when you take off the last boxes, there's no honey left and the queen is laying all the way into the corners. They can actually starve on you. So it was not extremely detailed, and I could pick everything apart into the smallest issues, but I'm open to any questions that I did not address or come up. Yes?
How do you make the Chinese grafting tool part thinner?
So basically there is the back plunger. You can pull that one out, and then the spring comes out too. Then you push the tongue out, put it on a table. You need to take a very sharp knife, and you just continue scraping. And then by the time once you assemble it and you put the whole grafting tool on a table, the tongue's supposed to bend. Usually they are so stiff they're not bending. It means actually at that moment you're pushing so hard that you're actually breaking the bottom of the cell. Some of them are looking more like a shovel. I would taper them out so you have a very fine tip. So basically when you drop them in there and just push a little bit, it automatically slides along the wall and picks up the larva very nicely. Anybody else? Yeah?
Could you explain the math behind the minimum of 50 hives for selection?
The math behind it is you need to have diversity. That's not so much the number itself, but the diversity that is available within a bigger operation. Because if you are on a smaller site, that you're not selecting, you're just reproducing. You're just making the same queens, but you don't have much to choose from. You can select, I guess, by buying somebody else's selection and introducing better genetics and then breeding from those, but still the amount that you have is not enough to choose from. It's not the math itself, it's just the number. It's going to be a little bit more in depth, but every queen that has to be tested actually has to create about 10 to 12 daughter hives. And by those daughter hives, you actually have to see if the genetics are stable passed on. If you don't have the amount of bees for that purpose, it's not possible. You have 5 queens that you want to test. Better put this thing down. Then you're already at 50, right?
So the testing, can that be done on nukes, or do you have to have a full-size colony?
Well, the question is what you test for, right?
Let's say it's
You want to test for survivability, you can test them on nukes. But you cannot test honey production on nukes.
well, I guess I'm more thinking about mite resistance then.
Mite resistance. Yeah, definitely. That could be tested on a smaller unit. I would not go below 4 frames because you have to have a biological entity in order to function proper. If the hive is too small, it does not behave the same. Sometimes they go from reproduction and honey production, they go back to survival just to sustain. So then the behavior changes. So I would not go to make it too small.
I got a question.
Yeah.
When you're checking for mite damage by the bee,
Mm-hmm.
is that bi-weekly, di-weekly, or bi-monthly?
Monthly.
So you do it 4 times.
Yep.
And when you put your queen into your, excuse me, one more, queen into your nuke, or your, do
Mating box.
you close it? Do you close it up and she's inside, can't get out?
For the first 2 days?
First 2 days?
Yes, correct. This box actually has a vent. It has a venting screen in here. And so that's plenty enough for them. And also the frames that are in here are right now completely built if somebody wants to look at them. But in the springtime, just 1 frame of honey is left in there, and there will be 2 3/4 inch strips in the other 2 frames welded in. So there's actually room for the 100 grams of bees easily to be in there and not overheat. Because if you would use all the 3 frames, you'll have some issues.
And you can
Yeah. Real?
Do you do anything to manage the drone side of the mating? Like, do you produce extra strong colonies and in an open mating setting like this, or do you actually have specific things you do to try to maximize your
Drones?
drone selection as well, to try to produce the greatest amount of drones for your diverse queens?
So I have extra deep bottom boards with the screens on it, and I basically cut every fall all of the drone comb off, sometimes in the summer too. And the outside frames are usually the older ones, and so I have a lot of drone comb in the outside frames, because in the beginning I want them to build the colony, and then once they're big enough to take care of the drones. Another thing what I noticed, and I read about this too in some of the scientific books, every colony has a certain size of comb for the drones itself. Because if you look at the drones, they're not all physically the same size. And so that depends how much of genetic diversity is in there. If you actually put printed comb in there, sometimes they will lay the entire frame full, but they don't want to take care of them because they're not their shape. I couldn't figure that one out in the beginning. So once you actually give them the chance to build their own size, they will take care of them. And they prefer actually to have the drones on the bottom. The drones like to have the temperature below 35 degrees. Usually they raise them around the 32 to 34 degrees. That's the interesting thing. And the drones are also sacrificial. They put them on the bottom, and if it gets cold, they move back. So they protect still the bees, but the drone larva dies off. And then they come back, clean it out, and restart it again. So that's the only way I actually deal with drones. And the thing is too, if you have a full-size colony, they are actually capable of raising drones right in the spring. If the box is full with bees, it's getting bigger faster because the drones are on the outside. A second-year queen will start laying in the middle, but then spring progresses and she will look actually where the drone cells are. And with my drone cells on the outside frames, it means actually she has to make a bigger nest in order to lay in those frames. So that nest expands automatically faster. So it's kind of a bit of a trick that I picked up over the years. Well, that's all I had for tonight. Anybody else?
Maybe one other question.
Yep.
So what is your timeline? When do you kind of generally start this whole process?
I'm not a calendar beekeeper. I am trying not disconnect my bees from nature's rhythm. So I feed in the springtime a paddy, not liquid. That gives the bees a sustainability, but it does not give them the turnover of energy and build up, so they can still vary it. I'm very much depending on the temperature outside. But the earliest queens that I had is the 14th of May. It was, I think, 30 queens or something. I could have done earlier than that, but I'm kind of cautious about it. And so basically, end of May, I start testing. I'm start testing already like probably the 15th of May. I start testing for Varroa. This year I did something unusual, and I think Tim did that too. In February, we had a couple of days of plus temperatures. So because my wraps are easy to move, so I picked up a cordless vaporizer, a sublimator for oxalic acid. And before I did that, actually I took 6 colonies off the stand, put a fresh bottom on, fresh bottom boards, put them back together, and then I went through the whole operation. 5 days later, I came back to test. Out of 6 colonies, there was 1 colony had 1 mite drop, and I think there was 2 colonies that had 2. The other ones had nothing. So basically, by hitting him that early and by using the plus temperatures, it gives the advantage to see how much mites are actually in there. I don't see any damages on deformed wings or anything for years already. I did see that in the beginning when I came here, but by requeening and replacing, actually it helps a lot. So that's, like I said, depending on the time when it gets warm, sometimes it's pretty hard because it gets warm almost instantly in the last few years. But I would say, yeah, May is my month.
Operate your bees when there's rain or mist?
How's that?
Do you operate into your bees when there's rain or mist?
I did that in Europe. That's why I went to Canada. I was beekeeping with a big umbrella. And I'm very honest about it because I did not have a choice. There is swarming season and you have to have it done. And we had sometimes cyclones coming through that were 6 weeks long of rain. And the bees don't stop. Just a question about the mist and rain. John?
I know it's early, and I'm sure you hear this every day, but you set a price for selling nukes or selling wings this year yet? Or is
It's
it
$340 for the nukes. Queens will be between 45 and 50.
first come, first served, you're
Pretty much, yeah.
sold out or no?
There are some people that are still waking up.
We push and we preach, if you're expanding, or if you know at this time where your losses are not favorable, to make sure that you have bees, if you're purchasing bees, to have your breeder lined up. Because you can get caught out, or especially if you're a new beekeeper, you think you've got all of this time. Some people are sold out, by the end of January, just either through reputation or just how valuable it is. Yeah.
It's from year to year different. Sometimes you get orders in fall already, like a significant amount, depending, I guess, how people look at the honey market. If they wanna have their order secured, then they'll do it in the fall time. With those almost 2 springs that followed each other, and they were pretty nasty. Some people lost in the first spring, some in the second one. I never had that issue. I had 8% losses, where pretty much a lot of beekeepers were at 50 and 60 and 70. And last spring I had 5% loss. So I don't know where I'm right now, but I just contribute all of this to selection and leaving them alone as long as possible. So on top of everything else, what I don't do, I don't use supplements that will drive my bees. Like I don't put any lemongrass oil or stuff like that. Kind of nasty to call it snake oil, but I kind of feel sometimes about it this way because it will skew the results that I get because they're not really behaving how nature is allowing them to. So like I said, I'm trying not to disconnect them too much from. And the question too is, what do I want? Do I want them to swarm? No. So I just leave them do. All right. Anybody else? No? Well, yep.